Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
Well, indeed it is. It is showtime. We're back at it again. And, normal week, this would be my big day I'm looking forward to because it's my On the Ledge day. And it's also the day I take out the garbage. So big outing for me, getting to the curb. It's all that kind of stuff.
It's a bit of both.
Which one are we?
Oh, you're right up there, Tim. You're right up there. All right. Breaking into the programming already. Tim Hudak is here he is a partner at Council Public Affairs. Keith Leslie joining us, longtime observer and veteran reporter at Queen's Park. You see and hear him on CHTV. John Wright is our resident pollster, and we're happy to welcome in former mayor of Toronto, John Tory. So it's just, John, good of you to join us. And, it just interesting to get your perspective and, sort of lead on some of this stuff just from two perspectives. First, as a former leader of the PC party, but sitting in the mayor's chair, the way, the time you spent there at City Hall. So let's start there because, so much of what we're talking about, it's funny to me. The first election that Mr. Ford ended up in the premier's office was all about municipalities. No sooner was he in the office than he was slashing your council in half. Now he wants to run on what's happening south of the border with Mr. Trump. So he's first of all was focused on municipalities. Now he's focused on what's going on in Washington. At any point, do you think he'll run on what's going on in Ontario?
Well, you focus on what you have to focus on to win. I mean, to be honest, I don't want to be cynical about this, but I thought how he launched himself yesterday was picture perfect in terms of what he's trying to do. Let's remember, not more than a couple of months ago, the enemy was Justin Trudeau, and he suddenly disappeared. But then, lo and behold, a new enemy appeared on the horizon, which was Donald Trump with these tariffs. And I think the only danger that's faced by Mr. Ford now, I mean, there's many dangers in election campaigns, as we all know, is that, the tariff thing might dissipate. I mean, even this morning, they're talking about the fact that maybe they won't come after all if we fix up the border. So, again, maybe provincial issues will come. Bonnie Crombie's giving it an honest try by talking about healthcare, and that, she's got to hope that might succeed in getting him to talk about that, because for him, the discipline is not to talk about that any more than absolutely necessary, if at all.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think, John Wright, you and I, we were on the sort of launch this thing earlier in the week, and that's what the episode really came down to, was trying to frame that, the ballot question, really. Is it fighting against Trump or is it fighting against Ford? So the extent to which that's the case, it was interesting to watch how the leaders positioned their campaigns yesterday in the official launch.
To protect Ontario and Canada, we need a strong leadership that is prepared to do whatever lies ahead, despite the chaos we now see in Ottawa.
Is he the guy for the job? No. Doug Ford standing up to Trump? No. Yeah, I say hell no.
You can't slap a label on a hat and pretend you're a leader. Real leaders fix healthcare. Real leaders work, and they are on the job, not gallivanting around the province calling unnecessary elections.
I think it's Doug Ford's record of failure. His failure to fix the housing crisis. His failure to fix healthcare. His failure in the fact that students are learning in overcrowded classrooms.
So, John Wright, I think to John Tory's point, the premier, we should be calling him the conservative leader at this stage now that we're in the writ, but Doug
He's
Ford.
Still the premier, Dave.
I get it, but the arguments are endless, and you know this, John. but when we look at the backdrop there, the flags are terrific. There's lots of construction vests and hard hats. All of that plays well into it. And again, the Ambassador Bridge in the background.
I think the premier was handed two gifts yesterday. One was from the nominee, the Secretary of the Commerce, Howard Lutnick. And that's where he came out and said, look, if we can do a deal on the border and the fentanyl stuff, Canada, we won't have to do, the first round of tariffs. But he did say, we'll get to the big stuff come April 1st, after we've had a review of everything else that needs to be done. So you would have been an interesting situation for the campaign if the Commerce Secretary, nominated Commerce Secretary, had said basically, okay, we'll be done on February the 1st, and then where's your campaign? So it actually will have some life beyond that date of February the 1st. The second thing is that I said on the first day that we, to judge how the leaders are doing in the campaign, we really will have to look at not only the launch, but give it some time on the road. And I have to say the second gift was actually the launch of the Liberal campaign. Between the slogan "More for You" and how it was launched in the wind, and yes, it was outside of the healthcare, but with no one standing in the background, outside with the announcement blowing in the wind, and Bonnie Crombie holding on to this hat, I was shocked at how, I have to say, how amateurish the whole thing was versus Merritt Stiles, where I thought it was a good launch, solid, good information, good style, good background. And Mike Schreiner, the way he always is kind of, he is the voice of the party. So I thought there were, three really good launches, especially with the Premier carrying the standard for Ontarians against Mr. Trump, and now having an extended version of that. But I gotta say that I'll still wait and see how this unfolds for the Liberals. But if the slogan and the launch are anything, then it's got to be where they're not going to get a lot of traction.
Tim, I always think that, and you will know this as well as anybody when you're out there campaigning, et cetera, props can work for you, but in some cases it becomes the focus and almost a meme. And I think Bonnie Crombie, the message is right. I mean, if you're going to go down the healthcare road, for sure, that's the thing, that's the drum to bang. But the cap became the distraction yesterday.
Usually the role is stay away from funny hats, right? And now you see hats playing a prominent role. You remember that feeling, Dave, when it's not too long after you're out of school, September still feels like back to school, or you got an exam in June. It kind of feels like that way as a former leader. So the feeling, I get when a campaign starts really is two-part. Number one, it's as exhilarating as hell, right? You're pumped up. You got a 28-day sprint ahead of you. You've got your map where you want to go and what you want to get to, but you don't know how many curves are along the way. But it really is an adrenaline rush. At the same time, you've got a really heavy weight on your shoulders. You've got people whose careers are on the line. You've got candidates and families who have set everything aside to run for you, and a team that also is banking on you to do well and ideally to victory. So that's how it feels when the gun goes off to start a campaign. Quick observations as somebody who's been on the ice after we watched the puck drop yesterday. I agree with my colleagues. I think Doug Ford had a sensational launch, great backdrop, right on theme. Although I did find J.D. Vance standing behind him a little bit distracting. Doesn't look like Vance with a hat on, Detroit in the background. I think that the Liberals and the NDP did not look as prepared as I thought. They did not look professional. Appreciate what John said. I won't repeat on Bonnie Crombie, but on Merritt, I think here's the mistake she made. The first day really is setting what you're going to do, what your vision is, what your contrast is. By spending your time attacking Ford and also attacking Crombie, I think that's a miss on the kind of message you want to set out right from the start.
Yeah, that kind of clanged for me, Keith, when I heard her talking about Crombie, Merritt Stiles, that is. And it just thought, wow, you're already going there. I mean, shouldn't the number one thing, all the guns pointed at Doug Ford?
Well, you would think so. And you would think as well, it's all about what you're going to do and what you're going to do differently, and not just make the 407 free for everybody, because we all know the NDP can afford to do that. I thought that was a really weak part of the launch. To expand actually on what John said about Bonnie Crombie's launch, up in Barrie, where the PCs immediately put out a release saying the Barrie Mayor is endorsing the PCs, not time for a change. Crombie, standing in front of that health clinic in Barrie, Mike Crawley, the veteran CBC Queen's Park reporter, pointed out that not only, he said election campaign launches are supposed to be big visual events, a splashy display. And not only was she standing there in front of this drab building, at one point, and we didn't see the video of this, at one point, a car pulled up behind her and unloaded itself while she was still trying to hold her news conference. True. Someone didn't even have that cleared off and backed off. So that's really, really a weak launch for a campaign where the Liberals are, they're trying to portray themselves as an alternative government. They want to leap right over official opposition status and be the anti-Ford vote. On the other hand, I think that focusing on healthcare is absolutely the right way for the Liberals to go on this, especially with the hospital emergency department overcrowding and the hallway medicine that report clearly did not fix. All of these issues with healthcare, I think, are going to play for them. And then we had the OMA release at the same time yesterday, the Ontario Medical Association, saying that there's hundreds of doctor shortages across Ontario, and pointing out each community and how many are short in each community. This is a big issue with a lot of Ontarians. Over 2.5 million don't have a family doctor. I think this is the one way the Liberals can really, really key on against Ford. Now, for his part, Ford's launch, I thought, again, was, as everyone said, was pretty solid, but he wasn't, he's gotten very good at not answering the questions. So when he was asked, for example, the fact that the privatization of the beer is not going to be $250 million cost just for that. It's going to be $612 million. The long-term cost could be $1.4 billion, $1.5 billion. But right now, it's over 3 times what you said it was going to cost. And he just comes back with, ignoring that whole thing completely and saying, but it's the convenience that Ontarians wanted. He's very good at not answering the hardball questions, ignoring the problems in healthcare, ignoring the problems with homelessness, and answering what he wants to answer. So for him, he's good. He looks good. The visuals are always there. He likes being in those vests. He likes having a hard hat on. And I guess it's going to play for him. But I'm not sure that people are buying that this is a need that he needed to call an election at this time. And we found out this week that it's going to cost $189 million. I still think people are going to, what is your justification for this election? I'm still not really seeing it. I don't think Donald Trump negotiating with Doug Ford is the real reason.
We're going to get to
one more.
Yeah,
comment.
go ahead, John. Yeah,
I think we overestimate as insiders, because we all are in one way or another, the sort of visual aspects of these launches and so on. I mean, I think people watching television, I think they will notice the hat. Unfortunately, it wasn't the best look. But having said that, I think we overestimate that, and I think it's more about the message and whether Bonnie Crombie, for example, can sustain that healthcare message beyond 2 days. Let's remember as well, I mean, the Liberal Party, I'm not making excuses for them, they have no resources. So the fact they did it in front of some desolate looking building with cars unloading behind them doesn't surprise me. But the key is the message. Can they keep that going? And the second thing I want to say is, Tim, I don't remember the exhilaration part of launching a campaign. I just remember the stress and all that part of it. I do not remember anything exhilarating about it.
Well, John Tory, and you bring up the point around resources, and I think that's at the heart of what I'm seeing vis-a-vis the Liberals, certainly coming out of the gate appearing to be unprepared. That seems to be the narrative here. Why are the NDP appearing to be so as unprepared? I mean, I think it's a different level of unpreparedness, but they've had runway. They've had the opportunity to be the official opposition since 2018. They don't seem to be any better off. And in fact, if you look at polling numbers, they aren't. They're sliding behind the Liberals again.
There's no excuse for it, to be frank, because they've had not only, let's be honest about this, they've had huge resources at the legislature as the official opposition to help them prepare policy and whatnot. It's not as if this really is a snap election. They call it a snap election. This is the most advertised, talked about election in advance for 6 months that I've ever seen. So there was no surprise in that. And so you're right. I mean, they should be better prepared. They should look better. The Liberals do have a number of reasons why they might, new leader, no money, et cetera, why they might look ill prepared. But there's no excuse for that, because of all the days you can be the best prepared, it's the launch day of an election campaign, because you had a lot of time to think about, what am I going to say that day? What's the message going to be? Where are we going to do it? And so on. And in this case, it wasn't as if Doug Ford woke up, a couple of days ago and just called the election. It's been telegraphed for months.
And in the middle of all of that, Keith, we hear, the riding association that once, was affiliated with Sarah Jama's campaign. She's now running as an independent, former NDP caucus member. They're calling for a leadership review in the middle of a campaign. And I know it's a silly thing, and I know it won't go anywhere, but all it does is it feeds into this idea that even internally, the NDP are, pointing the guns within.
Well, they always seem to have managed to do that at some point in the campaign or not. This is, remember the last campaign, the NDP outsiders, they're sort of deep soul thinkers that put out a statement that undermined the entire campaign for them. This is not a surprise. I think what we're going to get to watch in Hamilton Centre, though, is if we have Sarah Jama's running as an independent, and the Liberals are going to have a candidate, and the NDP is going to have a candidate, and the Greens are going to have a candidate. Could they all split the progressive vote? Could the Conservatives take Hamilton Centre? Andrea Horvath's former riding. The NDP, from what I hear, and I was happened to drop into Queen's Park on Monday and was talking with many reporters there. And one thing I seem to hear from virtually every outlet was a complaint about the NDP communications, that it takes hours and hours to get a response. And last Friday, when Ford confirmed that he was going to be, going to the LG on Tuesday and calling the election on Wednesday, took them like 3-4 hours to put out a statement. They couldn't get the leader out in front of a camera. I mean, the NDP appears to have a serious communications issue. And if the Queen's Park Press Gallery is feeling that, how is the rest of the country going to get, or the rest of the province going to get their messaging? They really need to focus. Apparently, they've got some issues right there. And this is not the time to be having communications problems when you're in the middle of an election, as John Tory says. That really wasn't a snap election. I mean, that's part of the reason the pollsters have been able to figure in this early call, because since the beginning of January, it's been pretty much him saying every week, this is coming, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this. So we knew it was coming, and they need to beef up their game, the NDP in particular, but they've been the official opposition, and they look, they're trailing well below 20 points. I think provincially and federally, the NDP's got some serious problems.
Can I give my conspiracy theory on that?
Yeah, please.
I do believe, we'll see if it's borne out in the campaign, the NDP is suffering from a severe identity crisis. And that means, to Keith's point, it's harder to communicate if you don't know what you're all about. And the NDP is competitive really in two areas. The one area is downtown Toronto, maybe a little bit of Ottawa. And the politics there is more focused around the identity politics, a bit of academia, the woke culture. And that is anathema to Northern Ontario and Southwestern Ontario, Niagara, where they're traditionally competitive, which is my grandfather's New Democratic Party, right? About the little guy, blue collar, manufacturing jobs, a bit of fight in the Tommy Douglas style. And I think they're conflicted. And as a result, this cancer, Sarah Jama, this anti-Semitic individual who staked her entire career on being anti-Jew is causing a problem. That tumor should have been excised some time ago. So my theory, I think they're actually conflicted between those two warring camps of the New Democrats, and it's hobbling their campaign.
Okay, Tim, let me just ask you then, and we'll get to you, John, in a second. But based on that, everybody's sort of focusing on the need for the Liberals to present well, because this could be an extinction event if they don't. At what level does the stability of the New Democrats, and I think federally and provincially, become a concern for people within those parties?
A weakness in New Democrats tends to be that they'll be tolerant of the other view. But, as John Tory and I know from being leaders, the campaign has no time for tolerance of other views. You've got to be a team. You've got to look. If you can't run your campaign, you can't run, the province. So this really comes down to the leader and the core people around them. You pick a path. You knew a date was coming sometime, at high likelihood in the winter or early spring, and you choose which of those paths you're going to go down, or find some way to reconcile them within platform. But I am worried. I like Maricel. I think she's a great communicator. She's on my radio show. I'd like to see her be successful, but I worry she didn't make that call on which path they're going to go down. John Wright?
Well, let me suggest a couple of things on that. I was a bit taken aback by the 407 launch, the policy on that, because I didn't quite know where that was coming from. But if I step back from this, I see a couple of things going on. Number one, I think what the NDP are trying to do is play a game of curling against the Liberals, where they're knocking out the rock. I mean, they didn't know what the Liberal campaign would look like. And as a result of that, I think they've thrown the stone at them because they want to own that left side of the spectrum, so that they can, be the choice between Doug Ford and their own party, and knock the Liberals out of the way. I think the second thing is, the 407, as I said, struck me strange at the beginning, but then it struck me that, it's an urban campaign. I mean, they really don't, except for a few dots in the Ontario province, they're really focused on Toronto and Hamilton and Oshawa, that kind of area. And it's almost like that's the urban barrier to the rest of the province, where they're going to be focused downtown. And and then you kind of go, well, Olivia Chow's got her troops down there as well, and there's a coalition of interests. So I just thought my first reaction was a bit negative, but then I started to think strategically about this, and I think I'm going to hold my powder dry on this one for a few more days, just to see how the next couple of days roll out in terms of what she's going to attack and where she's going to go.
But John Wright, isn't that already baked in? I mean, to be nuanced, to Tim's point, nuanced at this point is a little late in terms of trying to define your path.
No, I think it's more of owning the ground. I mean, we just had Stephanie Smythe declare in St. Paul's. I mean, she's a well-known name, having been on CP24. And the Liberals, if given a choice in this riding where Carolyn Bennett was, that is that the case where people suddenly go, okay, I know this person, I'm going to do it. You got to look at the policy of it. Jill Andrews owns this for 2 election campaigns in the end for the NDP. And her leader is actually talking about those things that will affect this area and the surrounding area in terms of traffic and things like that. I just think there's more to this in the strategy. And I'd rather wait another couple of days to see if they start hitting the platform issues, taking it to Ford and taking it to a policy level where I can see some distinction.
John Tory, we always talk about the importance of 905, and we understand why, and large, it's rapidly growing, intense buildings and people moving out to the suburbs because of the cost of living, all those things. And demographically it's changing and so on. It's become a real battleground. But I heard, Mike Schreiner talking yesterday about how, and somewhat to John's point, about the Ford focus on back to municipal politics, on what's going on in Toronto all the time, the bike lanes, all of this nonsense, for me anyway, that has no bearing on what's going on in Sault Ste. Marie or Sudbury or Thunder Bay or anywhere else. And so at what point does that begin to, hey, what about me over here? You're paying way too much attention to Toronto, and now you're paying all your attention to Trump, and we still don't know what's on the table there. When do I get involved in that conversation if I'm living in, Renfrew?
Well, and that's the trap that John Wright was just referring to in the context of Marit Stiles trying to, protect some of the turf that she owns in places like Toronto and focusing on some of those issues at the expense, I guess you call it, of some other issues. This is where I think the, trying to make healthcare an issue is actually as smart a strategy as you can come up with, faced with this seemingly monolithic kind of leadership campaign, fight Trump, fight the tariffs and so on, being waged by the Premier. Because if you could change the issue, healthcare is that one issue that actually doesn't know any boundaries. It doesn't know 905 from 416 from 705 because the doctor shortage, the hospital wait times, the emergency rooms closing are happening right across the province. And so, somebody like Bonnie Crombie has to hope that she can break through and get other people, have the Premier start to get asked questions about the doctor shortage and about hospitals, as opposed to just saying, I'm here to protect Ontario. Because frankly, if she can't, then that campaign won't go anywhere. And, Marit Stiles defending or talking about Toronto issues, I sort of agree with John. It's a risky business. And I don't think, by the way, that's going to hold them into some of those seats they hold in downtown Toronto. I think they fluked out 2 wins on those. And I think that if the Liberals get any head of steam up at all, not because of the merits of their campaign, they'll just win them back. But having said all that, you're right. I mean, why are we sitting around discussing bike lanes in a provincial election campaign, or why is anybody, as opposed to talking about healthcare? Tariff thing, fair game. It's about the economy. But some of this other stuff, the sort of minutiae of local politics in 416, I don't think is of concern, and it can breed resentment.
But it works for Doug Ford. The PCs are looking to make some gains in Toronto, and the bike lane issue, regardless of the scientific evidence or what we want to call behind it, it just doesn't matter. People, the majority, it seems, of our drivers hate the bike lanes and love Doug Ford for it. Doesn't matter what he's going to spend to rip them up even. They don't care. They want them the hell out. Anyway, we know how crazy an issue it is, but that's why it's an issue in the provincial election campaign, because it's working for Doug Ford and the PCs in Toronto.
But Tim, again, to you, does that not suggest there's a level of willful ignorance around what the other issues that are going on in the province, if that's the focus?
I think bike lanes are relevant. I mean, it's congestion, it's time that you spend, wasted in your car. So I think for the Conservative universe, that is very helpful in North Toronto, Etobicoke, Scarborough, and the near GTA. So I think it's a winner for the Premier. And plus Doug Ford, right, cares that you are where you come from. I would probably, if I were in that chair, have a little extra attention for Niagara. So he's focused on Toronto. Back to Mike Schreiner. Number one, I think Mike Schreiner is excellent. He punches above his weight regularly in the Ontario legislature. Smart guy. So I think he's gamed this out. He knows he's not going to be official opposition. Maybe it can be the third party. Number one, you need to defend your seat in Guelph and then defend your seat in Kitchener. Although I will say Rob Elliott, who works for Council Public Affairs, is the Conservative candidate there. So cheering him on. But Mike has detected something, I believe, in the small cities where he thinks there could be a winning Green candidate, and saying that everything is about Toronto, that often is a seller in those, medium-sized cities. So keep an eye on what he does the rest of the campaign.
So earlier in the week, we talked about the conversations around should they have an election, should they not have an election. And Deb Hutton on News Talk 1010 landed an interview with former Premier David Peterson. We can get into the history of the 1990 election. But I thought it was interesting when, Deb asked him, what were the differences? Are there differences? And his view of where Doug Ford stands and where he wants to go, admittedly, from the position of a former Liberal premier, was pretty interesting, I thought.
He doesn't even know what Trump has on offer. He wants a mandate. He doesn't even know what Trump's offer. He doesn't know what he wants to do. He just said, let me spend tens of billions of dollars. The budget is all his budgetary, should we say, probity has not been very high. They're running huge deficits without exceptional circumstances in the province of Ontario. He's not in good fiscal shape to manage all this stuff. He has bet the farm on EVs, on electrical vehicles, and if they get hit, it's his bet that he's going to have to subsidize people against. And he's going to have to persuade all people that he needs a mandate now, and he couldn't have done it sometime in the future. I'm telling you, he's got a very tall order, particularly when the primary responsibilities of a premier of the province of Ontario are in healthcare and in education, and there's a general sense those two areas need a great deal of work and tending and attention.
So, I mean, we come back to it, John Tory. I mean, those are the two lanes, education and healthcare, that more people bitch and complain about in general conversation that I hear, because it really is right where you live in many respects. And we've all got stories about how families or friends have had to cope and navigate the healthcare system and so on, or education. But let me just suggest, if in fact the polls play out and Ontario re-elects Doug Ford, is that suggesting for a second that, well, yeah, I know we say this in the polls that it's a top issue, but it doesn't really mean anything. We're giving him permission to walk away from some of the things that David Peterson just laid out.
Well, I guess you are in effect, but what you're really doing is succumbing to a strategy that they've carefully thought out that says we're going to make sure that healthcare and education are not the issues in this election campaign. And that's why the Bonnie Crombie strategy is probably the only one they can adopt to try and make healthcare or education, but she's picked healthcare, which is probably right too, to make it the issue. Because he's saying, no, the issue is entirely different. The issue is the economy and jobs and the tariffs and Donald Trump. And you have to always have an enemy, and Donald Trump's a very convenient enemy who isn't here, but he's there. And so, I mean, to me, that's exactly what this is about. I think David Peterson, in analyzing the business about who has control over the budget, yes, of course, that's all true. But we're into an election now. Doug Ford has indicated the lane that he's going to take, which is this lane that says it's about the economy. It's about re-electing a strong leader to deal with the economy. And, there's some merit to the fact that if you're going to spend billions of dollars, which weren't contemplated because of this tariff not being contemplated, that maybe you do need a mandate. So in that sense, I think David Peterson was being a bit partisan. In his case, his problem when he lost a snap election was that, and you remember there was a famous book written about it where they were having a meeting the night before the election was called, arguing among the Liberal advisors as to what the election was about. In this case, Doug Ford is very clear on what it's about. He does not want it to be about healthcare and education. He does want it to be about the economy and Donald Trump.
John Wright, if it's going to be about the economy, then why is this sort of unwieldy spending it just tolerated? Because when we look at the number of dollars that he's talking about adding to the bottom line of the budget and deficits, et cetera, will be on top of what is already a high spending government.
Well, I think when you get into a campaign like this, you frame it at the outset where it's going to go, but campaigns matter and the dynamics matter within it. And all of us know that while he kicked off with the Donald Trump threat of tariffs, that's not every bullet in the chamber that the Tories have. I mean, they just spent a ton of money on framing Bonnie Crombie as the taxing queen of Ontario. And, again, going back to the urban side of things in Toronto, it's not just bike lanes, but if you're a resident homeowner, not a renter, but a homeowner, you've picked up almost 20 to 25% tax increase over the last couple of years under Olivia Chow. So there's another part of this. We all know that campaigns start in one place. There are more issues to be laid out. It's by no mistake that the day before the election was called, we had Jane Philpott and the deputy premier who were talking about doctors and the commitment to have, a doctor connected to millions more people. Now, again, if it's carefully staged, all of the different avenues that you can go, where the advertising is coming from, where the third party advertising, which is going to support you, is coming from. So I think he's framed this as a background theme to trigger the election, but he's not going to shy away from some of the other key issues that we're talking about right now.
I missed the release, Tim, but we had it posited that once the election was called, that Jane Philpott was going to lose her job. So we're all done here. We figured it all out before the writ.
No, it's interesting. I mean, character of Premier Ford, Doug Ford, always very loyal, very, very loyal to those on the team. So he builds bonds even across party lines. So that is genuine part of his character. Look, I want to go back to the David Peterson question, reinforce what John Tory said there. First of all, I want to say I think it was very fortunate David Peterson for him to land an interview with somebody that likes Deb Hutton, right?
Well, there you go. Yeah, let's get it straight.
A big step up for him. But it was insightful, that interview, and I know News Talk will be streaming that, because there is a difference here. When David Peterson launched that campaign, as John outlined, there wasn't a cover story, right? There wasn't the motive for doing so. So it looked opportunistic, and the lack of a plan played itself out throughout that campaign, where they seemed to be all over the place and then desperate, promising a reduction in the provincial sales tax to try to win votes, right? So as Doug Ford now has the story, and he's going to stick to it. And I do believe that it passes a sniff test enough to say, look, Donald Trump is the single most unpredictable and probably, as a result, consequential president we've dealt with in a long time. We don't know from today until 4 years from now what the heck he's going to post on through social or X, or what he's going to do. I need a mandate to match that length of the term. I think that's going to sound plausible to a lot of voters out there, which goes back to the ballot. During these tumultuous times, these times of uncertainty, who do you want to have in the premier's chair to take these things on? That looks like Doug Ford.
Can I add to that, Dave, just for a second? Because Tim's right. I remember that campaign because it was the very first poll that I did with a media outlet. It came out the week before and shocked everybody, showing that Bob Rae was going to win the election campaign. And, there were other factors that were different then. We were coming off the Meech Lake Accord discussions, which were very, very divisive, and people were upset about it. There's a kernel in that a lot of people don't remember. And David Peterson had promised to appease Quebec by giving away 2 Senate seats, which did rankle some people. But we were also on the verge of a recession. 1990-91 was the deep trough that actually helped the NDP maybe win the election, but then also helped Bob Rae be eaten alive by his own as they went through that period of time. So the conditions were different. I'd say that Mr. Ford going into this campaign. Well, actually, when I listened to the former premier talk about the deficits and the spending and all this stuff, it reminded me of a former premier not too long ago who ended up with almost the same situation and was reduced to a small crew in the legislature. So I think Mr. Ford has come out with a much stronger position in this, framing it. But I think that over the course of this campaign, as I've said, there are other issues that he's going to land on that are going to have a striking accord with a group of people, mainly in urban centers.
It's funny, Dave, the stories you remember. John Wright made reference to that poll in 1990 when David Peterson lost. And I remember when that poll came out, and I think I'd been talking to John at the time and knew a little more about the poll and other polling that was going on. So people were asking me, like with a week to go, what's going to happen in the election? I said, NDP majority government. They look at me like I had three heads. If I'd taken bets, I'd be a rich man today from all the bets I would have won, because nobody thought that was possible. But it's back to your point about campaigns matter, because at the beginning of that election, David Peterson had a massive majority government, and he bet it on this early election with no purpose to it, and he lost big time.
And Tim remembers the point well, because we were sitting in the office, and Environics had out that big poll saying 50%. In fact, they had another one out that still supported it, but it was Bob Nixon at the Ottawa Exposition, and he made the drop in the sales tax. And all of us in the office, you could feel the mood shift, and sort of went, the ground just shifted. And in fact, we went to Southern News and said, we need to do a poll. And they said, nah, he's going to get a majority. Angus Reid made the decision on our own ticket to do the poll over the next 3 nights to get what we had. So again, you never know when something's going to kind of, flip a switch, and I will put it on the drop of that sales tax in Ottawa, which was the beginning of that crack that led to where Bob Rae ended up with the majority.
So, Keith, if we're talking about the need, the opposition really talking about the need for a change election, and in many respects that is tied to the length of time a government is in office, and we get tired. There's a fatigue factor. The change here has to be around how they're coping with and managing their message, with the exception of Stiles coming out and targeting Bonnie Crombie. I thought the other 3 opposition leaders were actually all on the same, singing from the same hymnal here. So is there a possibility at all that the collective voice is actually going to do enough to get the Premier off message?
I get him off message on occasion, but I think we all know that it splits the vote just the way he wants it split on the progressive side, and it works very well for him. And I think that's what we're going to see. To John's point about, Ford and the Conservatives having more in their quiver, before the campaign officially started, although even though I think it started last Friday, on Monday and Tuesday, Ford, basically every cabinet minister he has, and even some junior ministers, were out making something like $7 billion worth of announcements locally, and getting their own coverage before the election, and announcing things like we're going to build a Grimsby GO station. These are the kind of issues, again, the big project stuff that Doug Ford's going to hammer home. So yes, he's going to stick to the fighting Trump and the tariffs thing, and he loves playing this Captain Canada role, and it's going to work for him. But he's going to get pushed on the other issues as well. He's going to get pushed on what the government should be doing on provincial issues, and the homelessness, the housing, healthcare in particular. But I think he's going to have answers. He comes right back with all the stats. He's been so well briefed now. He can campaign and just say, well, we're building this many hospitals. We're building long-term care homes. He doesn't talk about actually staffing them, but he's at least building them. And they're addressing the doctor shortage with Jane Philpott. They're actually taking on as much as they can to try and diffuse these issues that the opposition parties are going to raise. But the opposition parties themselves, it's like Peterson said. He made a couple of good points, I thought, in there about not just this government, the PC government, being so adding to the record debt and record deficits, that they did bet on EVs, as did the federal Liberal government. But they did bet a lot of money on EVs and EV batteries. We're going to make the batteries for all the electric. Well, what if it looks like already that Trump has basically just cut that market right out from underneath us? What if those investments are gone? To Peterson's point, Doug Ford is now campaigning on, I need billions and billions of dollars to subsidize you because my bet on these EVs went the wrong way. So if the opposition can make hay of that, it's not an easy sell at the door knock when you got to talk to someone in 30 seconds, but it's the kind of issue that people can get and can understand, especially when the whole world now has a really good understanding of tariffs. Well, the whole world except for Donald Trump.
Well, Tim, the question though, and Keith brings up a really interesting point, that 30 seconds of connection with somebody. All the while this is going on, and Premier's waving the flag around, I got to fight Trump, etc. All of the government of Ontario ads continue to run on the radio, elsewhere, online, and saying, what a great job we've done. Look at what we've done with the hospitals. Look at what we've done with your licenses, how we've cut the costs. They're all very friendly. They're eye level. They're all about you and the affordability issue. To me, that's an unspoken part of this campaign, and I'm uncomfortable with it running during the writ, but just on the record.
Yeah, me too. Sorry, you caught me off guard. I didn't know that. I didn't.
Yeah.
We're early in the campaign. I realized this, so that shouldn't be allowed. really. Like government paid taxpayer advertising should, unless there's a clear public purpose.
No, it's a pat on the back. It's the same old thing.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be an emergency situation, isn't it? When you're in the caretaker mode, it's supposed to be only government releases in the case of an emergency or something has to be communicated, not regular routine stuff. Yeah.
I'm actually quite surprised, and I don't like that at all. But I want to get back to the main point in two senses here. One, the campaign we're not seeing. And I'll start with the Conservative campaign. So we're giving them plaudits out of the gate. Doug Ford is probably the greatest gut politician I've seen. I think it's because he's constantly connected with people, and this is a gut call. But as much as we're praising, their launch compared to the others organization, here's a little secret: they don't even have a campaign office, right? So there is a jeopardy here that they may not have plotted everything out as you would with a fixed election date. Some of this will be called on the spot. And during this campaign, these 28 days, there will be at least 2 or 3 surprises of some kind. External event, Donald Trump, as we've mentioned several times, and there'll be calls to reverse course, to shift. That's when you need to have a nimble team. And it's a tough call for the leader to say, we're sticking with plan or we adjust. And if you don't have your full structure in place, there's a risk that you might make the wrong call there. The unseen campaign. What I'd love to see more of, and I'm just not as in touch. What are, we follow the daily stuff in mainstream media. What are people getting through their social media feeds? What are as was done very well with Ontario Proud last time, supporting the Ford campaign or against the Liberals, right? How are they connecting with ordinary folks across their phones on a daily basis? I'd love to have some insight on what messages are penetrating there.
And of course, to Tim's point, Dave, it's incredibly sophisticated now. I mean, I just look at how campaigns have changed, where I remember the day, I'm so old, I remember the day that when it became a big deal to phone people and to actually, you'd get out the phone book. Literally, you would get out the phone book. A lot of people listening don't even know what that is. And they would copy down the names of the phone numbers out of the phone book on a voters list and then call them and say, I'm calling on behalf of Tim Hudak and you should vote for him. Now they engage through social media. They then slice and dice those people such that they can feed them an individualized message about the issue of concern to them. And as Tim says, the most important point of that is it's entirely unseen, except by the people who receive those messages. And so I would say the Conservatives, again, with the resources they have and so on, have a big advantage on that, and you never see it. So we can sit here all day and talk about the launch and how good or bad it was of anybody, but that's the part you don't see, and that is well underway. As well, I should say one more thing about the government advertising. It's so funny how history turns. Back in the day when I was involved with Premier Davis, which a lot of people, again, don't even know that name, but we would keep running tourism ads, and all the tourism ads said, this is a great place. And of course, they really had no place in Ontario. I mean, they were meant for other people to come and visit. And there was huge criticism of that, for just running tourism ads. Well, now there's ads from every single department that are running, and it has gone to a point that I couldn't even imagine it possible to have happen. And I think it does have an influence. They wouldn't run those ads if they didn't have an influence on something. So why would they spend the money?
Entirely. And it just, I mean, I think there's already an argument around the tone and the nature and the content of some of those ads vis-a-vis, is it about services being provided, or is it about a government celebrating, itself politically?
Didn't the auditor say 2/3 are basically self-serving?
Yeah.
That there was over $105 million spent last year on government advertising, and 2/3 she felt were basically self-serving for the Tory party.
Yeah. So, and the Liberals were the ones who actually, I think, if Keith allowed that to happen in terms of, freeing it up and saying, well, now we're going to be a little looser.
Kathleen Wynne used to complain. Apparently, when the advertising rules were much tighter before she loosened them, complained that a red apple was a Liberal symbol and the advertising couldn't proceed. So that apparently prompted the Liberals. No, I don't know. That's their story that they use for liberalizing the government advertising rules. But Ford, is playing under those rules. So.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm just saying, I just because one didn't like it or one does like it, it was all a political decision, period. So at the heart of it, that's what concerns me. And back to this idea of personalized, platforms almost. John Wright, you and I remember visiting one of the GR firms here in Toronto. This is might have been, it was pre-pandemic because we got to visit in person. And there's level of sophistication in terms of being able to watch the behavior online of people, and that's not to snoop on people, but it's just the stuff we do on Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. The level of sophistication then in terms of how they were able to target and, go into your feed on Facebook or Twitter or whatever it might be and say, John Wright, essentially, here's the platform for you. I mean, that's where it's come down to.
Yeah, and it's very pinpointed. I remember that tour, and it was a bit shocking because it was early on, right? And the entire room was filled with very young people who were just constantly tapping away at the keys and sending out all the messages and making sure that all of the missiles were delivered with precision. I got asked a question yesterday about polling and said, are the parties polling the province just like we get ourselves? And I said no. I mean, they kind of know where things are in terms of those people who love you and are supporting you and those people who hate you and are never going to be with you. What they're looking at are those constituencies which have the potential for movement or the potential to shore up to make sure that they are with you. And that really is the pinpointing of this. I mean, Tim and John and Keith, everybody is right in this. There's the traditional air war where, Yours to Discover would have been playing out back in those Davis days. And then there's the ground war where you're kind of, knocking on doors. But I got to say that those are only 1/3 of the puzzle now. I think 2/3 of it is underneath the surface and we don't see it. And Tim's right. I would really be interested to see the penetration and the focus of where those ads are going, because they may be very, very different than the above ground communications that we're actually seeing.
So if there's any opportunity and each of you in your own way has alluded to, well, what could happen in the course of the campaign to sort of derail something or amplify or give somebody a boost? Tim Hudak, is this the election where the debate may play more of a significant role in the outcome than we have seen in the past, only because the premier will have to face questions about all of the other issues aside from Trump? I understand Trump and tariffs will be one of the questions asked, but it's a 90-minute session typically. The consortium sits down and they fight over what kind of questions are going to be asked and who's going to ask them and all those sorts of things. But that healthcare and education and all of those things that presumably the Tory campaign doesn't want to talk about right now are going to be front and center in that debate.
Great question. I'll say yes, but down list. Here's a reason why I put it down list. This is the first campaign for both Bonnie Crombie and Marit Stiles. And, no matter how much you're out there on the platform as an opposition leader or former MP or mayor, there ain't nothing like it. When that light comes on, it is the brightest light of all. And the debate is, it's just an awesome thing. You're in this sort of cone of solitude, nothing around you except your opponents and whoever the moderator is and these Cyclops cameras bearing down on you. No human reaction around you. It's an eerie environment. So I think that's going to play to Doug Ford, who'll be in his third provincial debate. I think the greater risk is going to be human error, right? It happens that all candidates, despite the fact they may not all look like them all the time, are human beings and can make mistakes. I think the fact this is an early election, not a snap, but an earlier election, means that the campaign infrastructure and decision-making mechanisms will probably be a bit wobbly on the other side. Number 3, events, just outside events, particularly with the president we have now across the border. That could be the curveball that throws somebody off course and may change the plan that any of the parties currently have.
John Tory, what do you think in terms of the debate or the weight of the debate?
Well, first of all, I entirely agree with him. And I guess until you've done it, you don't know that feeling of standing in that studio. And there's just, in my case, there were 2 other people there, plus Steve Paikin, and that was it, because they don't even have camera people there anymore. Like, they're all robotic. And so it's just eerie. That's a good word for it. And again, back to what Tim said at the beginning of the podcast, there was nothing exhilarating about that. But having said all that, I think Tim is dead right. I mean, I was going to name as number 1, in terms of stuff that could happen that could alter the debate or frame the debate or even just alter the election, Donald Trump. Because there are no rules with this guy. There are no way to predict what he's going to do. He's not on any course that anybody could map out. I think after that is other events, which could be all takes, some terrible thing, God forbid, but some terrible thing to happen in a hospital, for example, to suddenly raise the salience of healthcare. as an issue. So I think that's number two. And then number three, as Tim well said, is human error. I mean, people do make mistakes in elections, and that can turn the tide in terms of, just reframing the debate. So, I mean, frankly, the opposition party leaders have to hope some of that is going to happen, or else I think the advantage goes to the incumbent.
Keith, the possibility of the debate actually mattering?
Has Ford agreed to a debate? Because his candidates aren't debating. They're already turning them down. Just like the last election, the PC candidates did not debate. Now, the Premier has. As you say, this would be his third. He'd be in a stronger comfort zone. But I haven't heard him say he's committed to a debate even yet. Absolutely. It's going to be, I think, for most Ontarians, we all know, most Ontarians don't pay very much, and we've been talking about the launches and the policies. Most Ontarians don't pay any attention at all, if they even are aware there's an election, until the debate happens. That's when people really do, literally, tune in to see what's going on and see how the leaders handle themselves. I think it's crucial for democracy. I think they should be held at every level. Local riding associations need them, absolutely. But the PCs just won't play. So I think it's a bit hypocritical to have Ford come in and agree to a provincial debate, but he absolutely has to. But I think it's, as say, hypocritical that he doesn't let his candidates debate across the province. It's crucial in local elections. How do you get to know someone if you don't watch them perform on stage? Now, they're not like these leaders debates where they've got just the cyclop cameras staring at you and no people in the room and a very eerie feeling. Debates at a public, local riding associations, public debates, those are very engaging, and people really do learn a lot about the candidates when they happen. I think provincially we saw Ford last time. I mean, when Mike Schreiner, who's also good at this, and it will be, I think, his third or fourth debate, when he started making some good points, Ford just said, "You're a great guy. I can work with you." I mean, he just almost undermined the whole position. Everyone else just saying, "Well, I can work with this guy. He's reasonable. Why aren't you people reasonable?" So Ford is very, very good at this. I think to Tim's point, he is that gut politician. He just seems instinctively to know what to do and when to say it. So I think even if he does get thrown off by something Trump does or whatever during the campaign or during the debate, Doug Ford seems pretty quick on his feet and just seems very comfortable in his shoes these days, no matter how many cameras or what type of question. He got asked on the official launch, what if you don't get a larger mandate? You're still, even if you get a majority, what if you don't? Well, the heck, like that couldn't even conceivably happen. He needs a larger mandate. But he has kind of set himself up with that one, hasn't he? I mean, what if even if he gets a majority, what if it's not as big as the majority he got 3.5 or 2.5 years ago?
I don't know, John Wright. We want to parse semantics and the rhetoric of it. I think we might want to do that, but I think back to the point, the Premier is well down the road in being able to sell that.
Yeah, but by the time we get to a debate, 2/3 of the public has pretty well made up their minds. I mean, we currently have 18% who are undecided or unsure. 10% will make up their mind in the voting booth. So you've got some wiggle room to move people around. And secondly, I find those debates now to be really difficult to engage with on television or in the studio. It's just a scream fest. I mean, we saw it in the last campaign for mayor in Toronto, and they just yell at each other and over each other, and people just go, "I'm going to watch something else." The next part is that all Doug Ford has to do is survive. I mean, and I think to your point, Dave, I mean, he's a really good person when he's on message. Plus, he knows, the weaknesses of the other two major party leaders, and he'll just hammer them on stage. The other thing that I don't think we're talking about yet is that I don't think the media is going to let him be handed this election campaign. We'll see a few more polls come out here, but all of us know that at certain points in a campaign, when it looks like the other person is going to win and there's no real opposition that's working, there is a mentality that takes over, whether it be on the journalist side or the editorial side, or whether it be in the staff in the office, where it kind of says, let's get under the skin and let's see what we do. So the media itself, whether they uncover something, whether they decide to go down a path, can change the nature of what we're talking about and where the campaign goes. And so I think they're another portion of this that by the time we get to the debate, that may have already started to happen.
Yeah, the answer, by the way, Dave, the answer to Keith's question about what happens if Doug Ford gets a reduced majority is that Doug Ford walks into the office that says on the front of the door, Premier of Ontario, the morning after, and carries on for 4 more years with a majority government. That's the answer to that question.
Right.
No one will care.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, no,
I talked about by people like us for 2 days, and Doug Ford will have government for 4 more years.
Yeah, trying to split those hairs, I don't think is really going to matter in the long run. All right, let's leave it there. A spirited conversation. John Tory, it was good to have you in the chair. Thanks for joining us. John Wright is here. Tim Hudak, Keith Leslie, and of course, this is all part. This was our regular routine as far as On the Ledge is concerned. We are going daily, as I have mentioned. And the idea here is to, have as much conversation. And, you think the last election was a little hard because it was the election about nothing. It was the Seinfeld election. And in this case, there's plenty to talk about. So if you've got a thought on it, go to my website, davetrafford.com, and hit the talkback button. If you've got something to add, complain about, scream about, whatever, into the maw, feel free. And we'd be happy to entertain your question, your thought, your comment. That'll do it. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast, the daily edition from Story Studio Network.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.